to discuss more about the bomber in Manchester, Salman Abedi. I'm joined by Charlie Winter from the International Centre for Counter-Terrorism and Adam Deen from the Quilliam Foundation. Adam Deen, let me come to you first. When you see that litany of appalling terrorist attacks and what we know about Abedi in Manchester, what's the theme? What's the trend? What's the common denominator?
I think what we're seeing is the aftermath of 2 decades of Islamist ideology running amok. And we're seeing the effects of there not being a strong counter-narrative, and that young Muslims are taking on this ideology of Islamism and understanding it to be an authentic representation and acting upon it and thinking that they're actually serving God.
But is the lack of a counter-narrative, Charlie Winter, is that partly the fault of the Islamic community, that they haven't built a strong enough counter to the Islamist ideology?
I think it's important to keep in mind that it is a tiny, tiny minority of people that actually think that any of this stuff is a good idea. That actually
but it can cause so much pain.
Of course
and
it
death.
can, but we need to keep it.
So the size of it, in a way, doesn't matter if you can kill 22 innocent people at a pop concert.
Of course it doesn't. I mean, it's not to detract from the atrocity and the scale of the atrocity, but I think at the same time, when we're looking for a better way to challenge this, a better way to counter it, we need to recognise that it is a small number of people, and also
all right, so we recognise it's small, but what do we do about it?
Well, what I'm saying is that the community, we can look to the Muslim community and we can ask them to do more, but the fact of the matter is that people like Abedi don't listen to the Muslim community. There's only so far you can go with that line.
But you think that that's because there hasn't been a strong enough challenge to it?
I mean, ISIS is fringe, absolutely, but the problem here is that the Muslim communities share a broad spectrum of beliefs with the likes of ISIS, with the likes of terrorists.
They share?
They share. And that's something that we need to be have a candid discussion about. And often these discussions about extremism, kind of medieval theology that supports these kind of acts, are not being discussed. It's almost been muted, and it's time to have an honest discussion about these ideas.
Let me just be clear. You're saying that there are views within the mainstream Muslim community, which will be appalled with what happened in Manchester, but have something in common with Islamic State ideology.
Voids are there to be filled. If your Islamic education is one that talks about an Islamic state, a utopian Islamic state, talking about dividing the world in terms of good and evil, these ideas, these concepts can be exploited by Islamist extremists. And I think that is actually what's happening on the ground.
Charlie Winter?
I'd be a bit wary of saying that there is a large number of people, or I mean, perhaps I've misinterpreted it. I don't know, but I think that the vast majority of people would very much be very adamant in saying that they have no part of them believes in anything that the Islamic State does, and whether that's something which is kind of contradicted by a belief in the caliphate, ultimately being an important part of Islam, that's a different thing. But I think in this context it's important to keep very much in mind.
But are the mosques, are the Muslim leaders, is the Muslim community in general, because in the end they are the best people to do it, on the well-known principle that only Nixon could go to China. The best people to do this is the Muslim community itself, which abhors what is going on. Are they doing it enough to make sure that the kind of messages that clearly Abedi was getting to cause him to carry this out are not reaching people like him?
Well, the thing is, it's limited what they can do. An imam.
But are they doing what they can do?
Well, I mean, I think if we just go back to what I was going to say, an imam in Manchester who is moderate, mainstream, whatever you want to say, they will not be able to resonate with someone like Abedi. This is a world where a lot of the radical activity that used to happen in so-called radical mosques, that can happen very easily on social media.
If I could just come in here for a second. 99.9% of Muslims plus condemn ISIS. That's not the challenge. The challenge is to take on these ideas that give oxygen to extremist narratives. And in terms of mosques and imams, it's not so much what they're doing and what they're saying, it's what they're not saying. What we need to do is inculcate values, human rights, democracy, freedom, these kind of ideals in young Muslim minds so they can be inoculated from extremist narratives. That's what's not happening.
To what extent, though, even if we were to get this right, and I get the sense that we're a long way from getting it right, that it's closing the stable door after the horse is bolted. I mean, we've learned that Abedi was in Libya. We think he might have been in Syria as well. We're told about 350 Islamic fighters who had been in Syria or Islamic State areas are back in the Manchester area. They've been radicalised. It's too late for them.
And I think the two multiplying factors, which we need to remember, is actually the ease of travel, which we've all got now and we all appreciate, and also the ease of communication, which means the very small 0.001% of the radicals, the idiots, can actually communicate and talk to each other and effectively multiply what they do. And of course, one terrorist attack is a huge issue across the world. And everyone now sees it. And of course, individuals can talk to other individuals and on the other side of the world, which was never possible, even a generation ago.
Is it going to get worse before it gets better?
I think so, yeah.
I agree.